I never thought perfection could be a prison. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs, all the red flags I painted rose-colored just to maintain the illusion. But when you're caught in the gleaming web of what seems like the perfect relationship, even chains can feel like silk ribbons. It began 3 years ago, on an autumn evening that seemed plucked from a romantic movie. I was hurrying through Central Park, my laptop bag heavy on my shoulder, trying to escape the sudden downpour that had caught me off guard. That's when James appeared, like some guardian angel, holding out his umbrella and wearing that smile that would soon become both my comfort and my cage. "You look like you could use some shelter," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to push back the cold rain. I remember hesitating for a moment, my mother's warnings about strangers flickering through my mind, but there was something so genuine about him, so disarming. He had kind eyes, the sort that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and he was wearing a well-worn Harvard Medical School sweatshirt that somehow made him seem safer, more trustworthy. We walked together to the nearest coffee shop, sharing not just an umbrella but pieces of our lives. He was a resident at Mount Sinai Hospital, specializing in pediatric surgery. The way he talked about helping children, about making a difference in the world, made my heart flutter. I told him about my work as an editor at a publishing house, and he seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about my favorite books and authors. That first meeting stretched into hours, and by the time we exchanged numbers, I felt like I'd known him for years. Everything about him seemed perfect, his ambition, his intelligence, his compassion. He texted me the very next morning, and within a week, we were dating. The first few months were like floating in a dream. James was attentive in ways I'd never experienced before. He remembered every little detail I mentioned, my favorite flowers, purple hyacinths, my coffee order, oat milk latte with an extra shot, even the name of my childhood pet goldfish, Mr. Bubbles. He would send me little care packages during stressful work weeks, complete with my favorite snacks and handwritten notes of encouragement. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he would tell me, his fingers intertwined with mine as we walked through the city. "You understand me in a way no one else does." Those words would echo in my mind later, taking on a different, darker meaning. Our relationship progressed quickly, but it felt natural at the time. Within 6 months, we were living together in his spacious Upper East Side apartment. My friends were in awe of how perfect we seemed together. "You hit the jackpot," my best friend Sarah would say, and I would beam with pride, feeling like I had somehow won life's lottery. But perfection, I would learn, is like a beautiful glass sculpture, pristine and flawless on the surface, but capable of shattering into dangerous shards. The first crack appeared so subtly I almost missed it. We were at a dinner party with his colleagues, and I was telling a story about a manuscript I was editing. James interrupted me mid-sentence, gently correcting my pronunciation of a medical term I'd mentioned. "It's tachycardia, sweetheart, not tachycardia," he said, his hand resting on my knee under the table. His tone was kind, helpful even, but something in his eyes made me shrink inside. The conversation moved on, but I felt the warmth drain from my face, replaced by a hint of shame I couldn't quite explain. That moment marked the beginning of a pattern I wouldn't recognize until much later. James always knew best, always had the right answer, the perfect solution. His corrections and suggestions were always delivered with a smile, always wrapped in concern for my well-being. He started helping me improve various aspects of my life, my diet, my exercise routine, my wardrobe. "You have such potential," he would say, holding up a dress he'd bought for me. "I just want to help you be the best version of yourself." The dresses got more expensive, the suggestions more frequent, and slowly, imperceptibly, my own preferences began to fade like old photographs left in the sun. I stopped wearing my favorite oversized sweaters because they were unflattering. I gave up my morning runs in favor of his preferred evening gym sessions. Even my reading habits changed. The young adult novels I loved editing were relegated to work hours only, replaced by the philosophical and medical texts he thought would expand my horizons. My friends noticed the changes before I did. Sarah tried to point it out during one of our increasingly rare coffee dates. "You seem different," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "More polished, but less you." I dismissed her concerns with a practiced laugh. "I'm just growing, evolving," I said, repeating James's words without realizing it. "He helps me be better." Looking back, I can see how those words should have terrified me. The idea that I needed to be better implied that who I was wasn't enough. But when you're in love with perfection, it's easy to believe that any discomfort is just part of the growth process, that any loss of self is just the shedding of unnecessary layers. The control tightened so gradually that each new restriction felt like a natural progression. James's work schedule became our schedule. His friends became our friends. His interests became our interests. He had logical explanations for everything: why we should spend holidays with his family instead of mine, they lived closer, why I should consider changing jobs, his hospital had connections to a medical publishing house, why I should stop spending so much time with Sarah, she seemed jealous of our relationship. I rationalized every red flag, painted every chain with gold. After all, wasn't this what love was supposed to be? Growing together, becoming better together. But we weren't growing together. I was being pruned and shaped like a bonsai tree, every natural inclination carefully bent to his vision of perfection. The moment I first felt real fear wasn't during a fight or a dramatic confrontation. It was during a quiet Sunday morning, as I stood in our kitchen, staring at my reflection in the chrome of our expensive coffee maker. I couldn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She was perfectly groomed, wearing the kind of elegant loungewear James preferred, but her eyes held a vacancy that terrified me. I reached for my favorite mug, a chipped ceramic thing with a faded Harry Potter quote, only to remember that James had accidentally broken it while cleaning last week. That's when the panic attack hit. Standing there in our perfect kitchen, in our perfect apartment, living our perfect life, I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in, and every carefully curated detail of our shared space felt like it was screaming at me. The throw pillows arranged just so, the color-coordinated bookshelf, the precisely organized spice rack, it was all suddenly suffocating. I slid down to the floor, my trembling hands pressed against the cold tiles, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the weight of all I had lost. My quirky clothes, my messy reading habits, my spontaneous adventures with friends, they had all been sacrificed at the altar of perfection. But more than that, I had lost something far more precious, my sense of self. When James found me on the kitchen floor, his concern was perfect, as always. He helped me up, guided me to our ergonomic couch, and immediately started talking about finding me a good therapist. "You're obviously dealing with some anxiety issues," he said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of authority and care. "I know someone excellent at the hospital." But for the first time, I heard something else in his voice, a subtle note of satisfaction. As if my breakdown was just another opportunity for him to fix me, to prove his indispensability in my life. I mumbled something about being fine, about just needing some rest, but inside, a tiny spark of rebellion had ignited. That spark led me to do something I hadn't done in months. I called Sarah without telling James. We met at a small coffee shop far from our usual haunts, and the moment I saw her familiar face, something inside me cracked. I started crying before she even sat down. "I think I'm losing myself," I whispered, the words feeling like both a betrayal and a liberation. Sarah didn't look surprised. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "We've been waiting for you to see it," she said softly. "All of us have." Over the next hour, Sarah helped me unravel the carefully constructed tapestry of my relationship. She pointed out things I had been blind to: how James had systematically isolated me from my support system, how he had replaced my confidence with dependency, how he had turned my own achievements into reflections of his influence. "Remember when you got that promotion? Sarah asked. Instead of celebrating your hard work, he talked about how his suggestions had helped you improve your editing style. I did remember. I remembered feeling grateful to him at the time, never questioning why I couldn't simply be proud of my own accomplishments. But the most chilling revelation came when Sarah mentioned running into my ex-boyfriend, Tom, a few months ago. He asked about you, she said hesitantly. He seemed worried. Said he tried to reach out when he heard you were dating James, but you never responded. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? I never got any message from Tom. Sarah's expression darkened. He said he sent several emails. He knew James from med school. Said there were things you should know. I felt sick. I hadn't checked my personal email account in over a year. James had convinced me to use our shared account for better communication. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He had been monitoring my communications, controlling my information, all while maintaining his perfect, caring facade. That night, I waited until James was on call at the hospital. With shaking hands, I logged into my old email account. There they were, 5 messages from Tom, dating back to the early months of my relationship with James. Each one more urgent than the last. I clicked on the first one, dated just 2 weeks after I'd met James. Sarah mentioned you're dating James Mitchell. Please be careful. He had a reputation at med school. His last girlfriend. I couldn't finish reading. My eyes were too blurred with tears. But I forced myself to open the other messages. Each one painted a picture that cracked the perfect image I had of James. Stories of controlling behavior, of emotional manipulation, of previous relationships that ended with women shell-shocked and transformed. The final email was short, I'm worried about you. You haven't responded to any messages. If you need help, please reach out. To anyone. I sat in the dark of our home office, surrounded by the life James had built for us, and felt the walls of my perfect prison more clearly than ever. The designer furniture, the carefully curated art pieces, the matching his and hers desks, everything screamed control, perfection, suffocation. But knowing you're in a cage and having the strength to leave it are two very different things. I had become so entwined with James, so dependent on his approval and guidance, that the thought of leaving paralyzed me with fear. What would I do? Where would I go? Who was I without him? The next few weeks were an elaborate dance of pretense. During the day, I maintained the role of the perfect girlfriend, all while carefully, secretly planning my escape. I started squirreling away small amounts of money from my paycheck, opening a new bank account with paperless statements. I reached out to old friends, rebuilding connections that had withered under James's influence. But the hardest part was facing my own complicity in what had happened to me. I had allowed this. Had welcomed it, even. Every time I chose his preference over mine, every time I silenced my own voice to amplify his, I had helped build my own cage. The shame of this realization was almost enough to keep me trapped. The turning point came during a dinner party we were hosting. James was telling a story about a difficult surgery he had performed, and I was playing my usual role, the attentive, admiring girlfriend. But this time, I watched our guests' reactions more carefully. I saw the subtle exchanges of glances, the slight discomfort in their expressions when James corrected my table setting or gently suggested I change my wine choice. They could see what I had been blind to for so long. The perfect facade had cracks, and through those cracks, the truth was visible to anyone paying attention. I wasn't James's partner, I was his project, his possession, his living proof of his own perfection. That night, after our guests left and James was meticulously organizing the dishwasher, because I never did it quite right, I stood in our bedroom and looked at myself in the full-length mirror he had installed to help me dress better. The woman staring back at me wore an expensive dress, perfectly styled hair, and impeccable makeup. She looked like a magazine cover, a carefully crafted image of success and sophistication. But her eyes were screaming. That was the night I started planning my real escape. Not just a physical departure, but a reclaiming of my identity. I began with small acts of rebellion, wearing my old clothes when James was at work, rereading my favorite lowbrow novels in secret, ordering takeout from the Thai place he deemed unsanitary. Each tiny act of defiance felt like taking a breath after being underwater. But James wasn't easily fooled. He noticed the subtle changes in my behavior, the moments when my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. His perfect mask started to slip, revealing glimpses of something darker beneath. His corrections became more frequent, his suggestions more insistent. The pressure to maintain our perfect image intensified. "You seem distracted lately," he said one evening, his fingers drumming an irregular pattern on our granite countertop. "Is everything all right at work?" The question seemed innocent, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. I had learned to read the warning signs in his voice, the subtle tensions that preceded his more controlling behaviors. "Just tired," I replied, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "Big project coming up." He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, a gesture that once made me feel cherished but now felt like a claim of ownership. "You know you can tell me anything, right? I only want what's best for you." Those words, "what's best for you," had become a recurring theme in our relationship, a phrase that perfectly encapsulated the subtle manipulation that had defined our time together. James always knew what was best, for my career, my health, my friendships, my future. My own opinions and desires had become irrelevant, dismissed as uninformed or misguided. The next day, I found a brochure for a therapist on my pillow, one of James's colleagues, naturally. "I think it would be good for you to talk to someone," he said when I confronted him about it. "You haven't been yourself lately." The irony of that statement almost made me laugh. I hadn't been myself for 3 years. But now, as I was finally finding my way back to who I used to be, he saw it as a problem to be fixed. I made an appointment with the therapist, but not the one James recommended. Instead, I found my own, someone completely unconnected to his world. Dr. Martinez became my lifeline, helping me understand the intricate web of emotional manipulation I had been caught in. "What you're describing is a form of coercive control," she explained during one session. "It's like being in a beautiful cage. The bars are golden, but they're still bars." She helped me see how James had used my own desires against me, my ambition, my wish to grow and improve, my need for validation. He had taken these natural, healthy impulses and twisted them into tools of control. The hardest part was accepting that someone I loved, someone who claimed to love me, could be so calculating in their manipulation. James wasn't an obvious villain, he never raised his voice, never used physical force. His control was exercised through kindness, through concern, through helping. That made it all the more insidious. I started keeping a journal, hidden in my office desk at work. In it, I documented everything, the small controlling behaviors, the subtle put-downs disguised as helpful suggestions, the way he would rewrite our shared history to make himself the hero of every story. Looking at it all written down, the pattern became undeniable. One entry particularly stands out. "Today James suggested I take a break from my job to focus on personal growth. Said he makes enough to support us both." When I hesitated, he reminded me how stressed I've been lately, true, but mostly because of him. He's planned it all out, even has a contact at a wellness center. Why does his vision of my personal growth always involve making me more dependent on him? The journal became my reality check, my way of maintaining clarity when James's perfect world threatened to pull me back in. It also became my battle plan. Each entry helped me strategize my escape, mapping out the steps I needed to take to reclaim my life. I started squirreling away money from every paycheck, opening a new bank account at a different bank. I gathered important documents and made copies, storing them at Sarah's apartment. I researched apartments in different neighborhoods, far from our usual haunts. Each step was taken with painstaking care, knowing that one slip could alert James to my plans. But the most important preparation was mental. I had to rebuild my sense of self, piece by piece, remembering who I was before James's influence. I started making small decisions without consulting him, choosing what to eat, what to wear, how to spend my free time. Each choice felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I also had to face the shame and guilt that had kept me trapped for so long. Shame for allowing myself to be controlled, guilt for planning to leave someone who, on the surface, had only ever tried to help me. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that these feelings were part of the manipulation, that James had engineered our relationship to make me feel responsible for its toxic dynamics. "You're not betraying him by saving yourself," she told me during one particularly difficult session. "You're not being ungrateful by wanting to be your own person." The turning point came during a charity gala at James's hospital. I was wearing a dress he had chosen, speaking to people he had deemed important, playing the role of the perfect partner. But this time, I was watching him through new eyes. I saw how he subtly dominated every conversation, how he positioned himself as the authority on every topic, how he would guide me around the room like a prized possession. Then I overheard him talking to a colleague about me. "She's come such a long way since we met," he was saying, his voice warm with pride. "You should have seen her before, so unfocused, so unsure of herself. She just needed the right guidance." In that moment, something inside me snapped. The last threads of doubt about my decision dissolved. I realized that James didn't love me, he loved his creation, the carefully molded version of me he had crafted. The real me had never been enough for him, and never would be. That night, after the gala, I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing, and felt nothing but a profound sense of disconnection. The man sleeping next to me was a stranger, or perhaps, more accurately, I had finally become a stranger to the role he had created for me. The next morning, I began executing my escape plan. I waited for a weekend when James was scheduled for a 48-hour shift at the hospital. The timing had to be perfect. I needed enough time to move out completely, to ensure there would be no chance of him coming home mid-escape. Sarah and 3 other friends arrived early Saturday morning, armed with moving boxes and determined expressions. "You're doing the right thing," Sarah whispered as we packed up my pre-James belongings, the things that had somehow survived his subtle purging of my personality from our shared space. My old books, my family photos, the quirky collection of mismatched coffee mugs he had relegated to the back of the cupboard. It was strange, seeing my life reduced to boxes, seeing what little of my original self remained in this perfectly curated apartment. I left behind everything he had bought me, the designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the improved versions of things I had once loved. Each item felt tainted now, like physical manifestations of his control. The hardest part wasn't the moving, it was writing the letter. How do you explain to someone that their version of love had become your prison? How do you tell them that their perfection was suffocating? I went through a dozen drafts before settling on something simple. James. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know you'll want to fix this, to fix me, but that's exactly why I have to leave. I'm not broken. I never was. I just wasn't the person you wanted me to be, and I can't keep trying to become that person. Please don't try to find me. This isn't a negotiation or a cry for help. This is me choosing myself. Goodbye. I left the letter on his perfectly organized desk, next to the family photo he kept there, the one where I'm wearing the dress he chose, smiling the smile he taught me, being the person he created. It felt symbolic somehow. The first few weeks after leaving were both terrifying and liberating. I stayed with Sarah initially, jumping at every phone call, expecting to see him around every corner. James's reaction to my departure was exactly what I had expected, a calculated campaign to bring me back into his orbit. First came the messages, dozens of them, each one a masterpiece of Manipulation. He was worried about me. He just wanted to talk. He understood I was going through something, and he wanted to help. When those went unanswered, he escalated to having his friends and colleagues reach out, each one expressing concern about my mental state and offering to help me work things out with James. But the most insidious attempts were the ones that almost worked, the messages that acknowledged his mistakes, that promised change, that reminded me of all the good times. "I know I can be controlling sometimes," he wrote. "I just love you so much, I forget that you need space to be yourself. We can work on this together." In my weaker moments, usually late at night when the world felt lonely and uncertain, these messages almost broke my resolve. The familiar pull of his perfect world, the allure of his strength and certainty, called to me like a siren song. But then I would read my journal entries, remember the hollow woman in the mirror, and find my strength again. Recovery was a gradual process. With Dr. Martinez's help, I began to unravel the complex web of manipulation that had defined our relationship. I learned to recognize the patterns, to understand how my own insecurities and desires had made me vulnerable to his particular brand of control. The hardest part was learning to trust my own judgment again. After years of deferring to James's opinions and preferences, even simple decisions felt overwhelming. What did I actually like to eat? What did I enjoy doing with my free time? Who was I when no one was trying to shape me into something else? I started small, buying clothes that made me happy rather than ones that looked appropriate. Reading books for pleasure without analyzing their literary merit. Eating Thai food from street vendors without worrying about food safety ratings. Each decision, no matter how minor, felt like a small victory in reclaiming my identity. 6 months after leaving James, I finally felt strong enough to have coffee in our old neighborhood. As I sat there, wearing a bright yellow sweater he would have hated, eating a messy pastry he would have deemed too sugary, I saw him. He was walking with a woman I recognized from the hospital, his hand resting possessively on her lower back, guiding her movements in that familiar way. She was wearing a dress similar to ones he used to buy for me, her hair styled in the elegant way he preferred. She was laughing at something he said, looking up at him with that same mixture of adoration and anxiety I used to feel. For a moment, our eyes met across the street, and I saw recognition flash across his face. But instead of the fear or longing I might have expected to feel, I felt only sadness, not for myself, but for her. She didn't know yet that she was standing at the beginning of a path I had just escaped from. That her transformation into his version of perfection was already underway. I wanted to run across the street, to warn her, to tell her to run. But I knew it wouldn't make any difference. Just as others had tried to warn me, just as Tom had tried to reach out, she would have to discover the truth for herself. All I could do was hope that when she did, she would find the strength to choose herself, as I had done. That evening, I wrote one final entry in my journal. Today I saw James with someone new, and for the first time, I truly understood that leaving him wasn't just about escaping his control, it was about choosing to be gloriously, imperfectly myself. Sometimes the most beautiful thing we can do is shatter the perfect image others have created for us, even if it means walking away from what looks like a fairy tale. Because no fairy tale is worth the price of your soul. If you're watching this and something in my story resonates with you, remember, perfect love shouldn't require you to be perfect. Real love gives you room to grow, to make mistakes, to be yourself. Don't let anyone's version of perfection become your prison. Like and subscribe if this story touched you, and remember, you deserve to be loved for who you are, not for who someone else wants you to become.